Today... Alright, anyway. Today I am sharing the story of how I got my first car, what first car I got, why I got that car, all that juicy nonsense. If you're not interested in a long story, that's fine. I'll tell you the 5-second version, the TLDR version. I wanted a fun, fast car. After a couple issues, I got one. Yeah, that's it. If you don't like long stories, I assume you're gone already. But if you're here for details, for juicy details, you come to the right place. All right, let's hit it. Let's go. Let's rewind back to, let's say 2015 or 16 maybe. Right around the time I was getting ready to buy my first car. I had a job at a restaurant, probably working like 4 or 5 days a week. Anywhere from like 5 to 8 hours a day, depending on the day. Of course, I was still going to school. But in the end, I saved up some money to buy a car so that by the time I got my own license, my G2, which is what you need to drive by yourself in Ontario, I wanted to have enough money so that as soon as I got my G2, I was gonna be on that road. So as any 16-year-old will do, I immediately hit the used car market and started looking for cars that I could not afford whatsoever. Here I was with like 3K in my bank, looking at cars for like 5 figures, you know, 10 grand and up. For your first car, you really don't need that at all whatsoever, if I'm being honest. I didn't go, you know, all out and crazy on my first car, but I did want something that I could enjoy. So after sifting through a ton of options, a lot of which now looking back is kind of cringy. It's very cringy that I think back to it. So obviously I started looking for small, cheap, fun cars. The car that I wanted more than anything was a 2006 Hawkeye STI or WRX. And it soon dawned on me, just doing a little bit of poking around and, you know, looking online and stuff, I kind of realized there's no way I could afford one. Realistically, one that's in any kind of decent condition. So I kind of gave up on that dream. I started looking for other things. I even started looking at legacy GTs, which if you don't know have the same powertrain as the WRXs, comparably. The legacy GTs were actually, I think, a little cheaper, even though they're almost the same car underneath. And then my priority shifting, and then my new kind of top pick, I guess, became the Legacy GT. Again, those were, at least the ones that were in any kind of good condition, were wildly out of my price bracket. So, you know, I kind of gave up on that too. And then that's when the downward spiral, and then that's when just the downward spiral, and that's when the I can't say those words, downward spiral. That's when the downward spiral began, and I started looking at, you know, those weird, quirky, like, to give you an example, at one point I was looking at Impala SS sedans. Yeah, it has a 5.3 liter V8, makes a garbage amount of horsepower for that kind of displacement, front wheel drive, and it's just a heavy family sedan kind of thing. So yeah, I was getting pretty desperate. I just wanted to have something that I could, you know, that I could enjoy, that I could have fun with. None of those really tickled my fancy too much. I don't know, I didn't want to settle for it or anything. I just kind of held off, kept looking. By this time, it was already past the time that I had my G2. I'd had it for, I think, a few weeks. And instead, my mother and I shared her car. It was a 2016 Nissan Micra. Yeah, it was the top trim, so had that going for us, I guess. You know, we shared her car for, I think, about 6 months or so. I believe it was just around late April when I got my G2. That's when I started like really legitimately looking at cars. It took a long time for me to sift through all these options and to just wait it out, hope that something good could come along. So after a few months of using my mom's car to drive from my house to school, or from school to work, or from my house to school, I already said that, or from my house to work. My mom was working too. I mean, she still is, but you know, she was also working back then. Her schedule, it wasn't radically different than mine. Actually, the only reason why I could use her car at all was because our work schedules were somewhat similar. Usually what would happen is I take her car to school. I come back home around 3 o'clock. School ended at 2:30, so 2:32 if you want to be specific. I'd come home at around 3 o'clock, you know, in around that time, give or take 10 minutes, depending on traffic and how much I was goofing around after school that day. Yeah, I'd always come home before 3:30 because my mom had to work at 4. Oftentimes I had to work at 4. So basically, as soon as I get home, I'd just wolf something down, which is really hard for me because if you know me, I'm a very, very slow eater, so it was nearly impossible. That's just how we did it. I'd come home from school and immediately I'd just wolf something down. My mom would be telling me to get out the door like every 5 seconds. and you know, eventually would make it out. She'd drop me off first, and then she'd go to her work. I'd just chill for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then, you know, I'd just clock in and start working away. And usually we actually ended at the same time, so we'd usually start around the same time, and we'd also end around the same time, so that worked out pretty well for us. But you know, obviously it wasn't always going to work out that way. My mom's schedule was changing all the time. Above everything else, I just wanted to have my own car. So, you know, I kept on looking. I was waiting just for cars that I'd actually want to buy to come up on. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and eventually I said to myself, you know what, I'm gonna nail down a couple options for sure that I would buy. I'm not gonna look beyond that, and I'm not gonna look for anything less than that. So whatever I picked, that's what I would stick with. So eventually I narrowed it down to these two cars, the Subaru Forester XT and the Lexus IS300. They're not very similar. I don't think people would generally cross shop those two cars. You know, for me, I didn't really care. I just wanted something that was fairly practical. Obviously, it wasn't gonna be like, you know, a rocket fast or anything. It would still be fun for sure. I mean, for a 16-year-old, the kind of power those came with, and the potential power, which is what I was looking for, was even more enticing. So one had a EJ25 with a turbocharger on it, and the other one had a 2JZ naturally aspirated in it. Two of the most popular modifiable engines, right? Or modded engines? Modding engines? I don't know. Two of the most popular engines that people use for modding and stuff like that. You know, obviously that was a huge factor into my choice. Eventually I told my dad about it. He wasn't too sure about what kind of car I was looking for, but I eventually showed him, and then I found a specific one. So I said, Dad, this is the car that I want to buy. I could just almost outright buy it. So I showed him one particularly that I found on, I think it was at the time, not sponsored by it, but willing to take that sponsorship as soon as I gain a following. But yeah, so I'm just having my hand up here the whole time. So yeah, I showed him this this gray, I think it was a dark gray, no, it was a light gray IS300 with, I think it was 212,000 kilometers. Is a 5-speed automatic, was it, or a 6-speed? I forget what it was, but it was an automatic because the manual one is very hard to find. And it was in pretty good shape. I mean, just from the pictures alone, from what I could tell, it was a car that I would be comfortable buying. So yeah, I showed my dad. I'm like, hey Dad, I really want to get this car. It was kind of funny because I think at the time he just had a misunderstanding of why I wanted to get this car. I don't think he knew about what my actual criteria was. I think mainly it was, I never really contemplated it. I never really knew for sure. Like, I never asked him about it or anything, but of course without him knowing about, you know, the IS300 as a platform. I think at the time what he thought was that I just wanted a car because it had a Lexus badge on it. And, you know, at the time, when I was actually looking for cars, I honestly, even more so now, I don't care about the badge. I don't care about whatever it represents, you know, right? I'm not gonna choose a, you know, a BMW over a Toyota because people like BMWs more, you know, it's just not, I think that's ridiculous. You know, not to say anything wrong with BMWs. I love BMWs. What I'm saying is they're not just blatantly all better than every Toyota, because yeah, like I said, that's just ridiculous. So yeah, I think at the time that's what he thought. You should be looking here, and he thought I was trying to go up here, so he's like, no, that's ridiculous. It's not gonna happen. As much as I wanted to, and I was really torn by it, to be honest. I'm not gonna lie. It kind of hurt me at the time, but you know, I guess that's just how things worked out. And so I stopped looking for IS300s, and then I turned my way to Forester XTs.